to the place where singles shine, celebrating life, divine by design. In faith and love, we intertwine. Route 77, where your journey's prime.
Welcome back to the Route 77 podcast. Thanks for joining us as we continue our series on dating and all the complexities that come with it. Today we're looking at a verse that you've probably heard many times, especially within the context of marriage. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers, for what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? 2 Corinthians 6:14. Most of us automatically connect this verse with choosing a spouse, and that's certainly part of it. But it also applies to other areas of life, friendships, business partnerships, and the relationships we invest in most deeply. In this episode, we'll unpack what it really means to be yoked to someone, why it matters so much to your faith, and how different convictions, even between believers, can create real challenges. Whether you're dating, thinking about marriage, or evaluating other partnerships in your life, we hope this conversation helps you reflect with wisdom and clarity. Welcome back to the Route 77 podcast. I'm your host, Natasha, and I'm here with Monique.
Hello.
And David.
Hello.
And we are here to continue on with our dating series. And we talked last week how we would talk about this topic this week. So basically, I can just get right into the verse of what we're talking about. 2 Corinthians 6:14. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers, for what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? And I think what's interesting is that most of the times when we either hear this and or use this, we think about marriage. Like that's what it's specifically applying to. But it's just a thing that it applies to. And I think
Yes.
like we can talk about what a yoke is because like maybe some people don't know. And it's just,
And maybe that's why they believe, consider that to be like a marriage thing. Because when you are yoked, like, that means that's a farmer thing, where they have oxen and they're yoked together to plow the field. And if you've got one that's not as strong as the other, then you're just going to go around in circles. If you put a donkey with an ox, you're going to not go very far. Something similar to that. So I think that's why they
It's actually the way they walk.
Yeah.
It's uneven. So when they're plowing the field, the stride of the ox and the animal are radically different. So it creates kind of like a disaster.
especially because you have the weight of the plow behind, so it's being dragged, and if it's just being dragged like one direction, it's not gonna be very easy to plow a field in a straight line.
No. Then it gets looking really weird.
Yeah, looks like the drunk farmer has been plowing their field again.
That's probably what the neighbors say. Oh, look, the drunk farmer was at it again. But I get what you're. Sorry, I've got an itch. I get what you're talking about when you say, that it doesn't just go toward marriage, because that is the same sort of thing that happens if you're even in friendships.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you can't pick your family.
But even like when it comes to friendships, it's not just like every friendship, but really the ones that you put a lot of weight into.
Significant friendships. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like if you were to go and like I said, when I was going with my ex and I was trying to figure out if I'm supposed to separate, divorce, all this type of stuff, like I didn't feel like I could go to a person who was not a Christian because I didn't like they're just going to be, and it's not because they have any malintent. They're like, they want what's good for you from their perspective. And a lot of it's like, you have to do what makes you happy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I love that you care enough to say that, but that's not like that's not the reason that I should do this or not do this. It needs to be whether what's biblical and what it should be doing. So for me, some of the people who were kind of speaking into that situation were, and I wasn't specifically going to them and going to take all their advice. It was just I was going through it, so it was like obvious that I was going through it, and so it was hard because it's like I know they want like good things for me and they care about me, but just because it's makes me happy or something, it doesn't mean it's always it doesn't always mean it's the right thing to do in the time, especially when it comes to marriage.
Right.
So
Right.
for me to have gone to like, it was hard for me to listen to people who were not believers. And so that's where I put a lot more weight into those who were believers and that I was closer with.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe I was one of those people that you had kind of asked, what should I do in this situation?
Yeah.
And it was more like, it's such a hard one too, because, depending upon the kind of information, and I'm trying to remember if you had spoken a lot about but more that he was kind of not coming home for weeks.
A lot of emergency vehicles going by.
Yeah. Last time that happened, it was not a good thing.
Well, it's usually not a good thing when emergency vehicles are needed.
No,
But
no,
yeah.
it's not. But when it's a lot of them, like last week was a lot of them, and we found out that there was a very bad incident that happened not far up our road, which is kind of sad. Yeah, I can't remember if you had mentioned about certain things, and I think what I approached it in a different respect is like I'd asked you questions like, how are you feeling with this, and what are your thoughts, and do you think he's being unfaithful? Because that's a definite not a good thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I just remember really in that time, like it was like hard because there's people trying to give me advice and I just basically couldn't like
Yeah.
take it because I knew that our perspectives were coming from a different like source.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that they were wrong but it was the sort of the right thing for the right reason that I was like,
Yeah.
so I had
Yeah.
to make that distinction when people were talking to me and trying to give me advice.
Yes. Yeah. And when it comes to people who are not believers speaking into a marriage situation, their thing is like, he's a jerk, divorce him, just do it.
Yeah.
When that may not be the right answer even at that time, it may not be the right answer. And as believers, we have a different take. Marriage is supposed to be for life, and except for marital infidelity,
And
you're
abuse and stuff. Yeah.
an abuse. Yeah, like if there's physical, even mental abuse, sometimes
Lots
it's
of
like,
different abuses. Yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah, that is just, yeah, I just remember that specifically going through that. And then I had to sort of like partition off like some advice from others just to sort of like appreciate that they cared enough to like, I appreciated that they cared
yeah,
and stuff, but it was something like I couldn't, but I had to make that uh, determination.
yeah,
If you have a good, like maybe like a best friend that you have grown up with, and then you might end up putting more weight onto them without making that distinction. I'm not saying you would, but potentially you
yeah,
could,
yeah,
because you've invested a lot into that friendship, and so you trust them with
yeah.
some of these things. And maybe if you're going through some things that are difficult, like you're not always thinking straight. You're just like
No,
living
no.
through the moment, right?
And and a lot of times when you're going through a difficult time in your relationship, in your marriage specifically, it's really hard to talk to anybody about that because there's that element of shame that comes with that. It's like, this is supposed to not happen. You're not supposed to have these kind of problems. You're, Christian person. And if you're specifically talking to somebody who is a not Christian person, you would expect them to see your marriage in a different light. So even if it's your best friend, and I had that, I was like, I didn't want to tell her the kind of problems I was having because I didn't want her to think that Christian men were horrible people.
Yeah, that they're sort of no difference than the other ones in a sense.
Exactly. And that was as a more mature believer now, I see that that's such a false um way of thinking. That's a devil's way of thinking. Because people are people and we make mistakes, and we sometimes make grievous mistakes because we are sinful humans, even if
And not
we're
all people who claim the title Christian are Christian either.
exactly that too. Yeah. Some will take on that just to get something that they wouldn't get anywhere else, I guess.
Hmm. So that's just like like, but also like I was even thinking like with Monique and myself buying the house together. Like there's a if we had been unequally yoked in the sense of not having the same perspective beliefs, like this could have gone wrong. And I mean, it already has a hard time if you don't have the right person anyway. But if you have a complete different like set of ethical, moral
Yeah.
views, then like, you don't know what would happen because what you think you're okay with or you kind of like okay with, and then all of a sudden it's not okay. Like, these things come in that you never thought about.
Yeah.
And like having like guys stay over or like multiple partners in a month or
Yep.
whatever, like it's just like this.
Yeah. If like if because I'm older, and the chances of me bringing home a guy are slightly slimmer. If I were the the Puritan Christian, and she was the
crazy person, the crazy youngster.
crazy the crazy youngster, just like, yeah, it's a new guy every week. That would make the situation very, very, very uncomfortable. So these are things that,
Or even
exactly.
if you're like, all of a sudden we're like, okay, is it smoking marijuana okay in the house? And like just all those
Not,
type of things you could lead into that aren't
yeah,
like technically illegal, but could be considered
yeah.
immoral or not
Or, e-
preferable.
yeah, or even if you're, you're one of those who likes to party all night, and you get your friends over, and you play the music loud, and you drink and you smoke, and it's just like, and the other person's like, I gotta get to work. There are a lot of things about being and you don't even have to be of the same faith. Even if you are people not of the same faith, if you have different ideas of how, like, you got a party hardy person with an introvert who works hard and doesn't play hard. You're going to have those same kind of conflicts. If you've
And
got somebody who's a hoarder with somebody who's a neat freak, you're going to have those kind of issues too.
and what's interesting too is it would be different if we were renting together versus buying the house together. Because
Yeah.
that's sort of like the difference in the sense of being yoked equally. You can just be like, oh, we're renting with friends, but you have that sort of freedom to just be like, oh, you know what? I just can't, like, I thought it was going to work out. It's not.
I'm going to
You,
move out.
yeah, you're going to
I'm in
move
a
out,
different
find somebody
place.
else, whatever it is. You can even do it amicably. Just be like, you know what? I thought this was going to work. I found this other friend. Maybe they're okay. You could do it where it's not like a,
Yeah.
like a,
Or
like a, like
or
a
just like
division.
it, yeah, that the commute to work is just too long. I'm moving closer to work.
Yeah, or just like all those options. Like, and
Yeah.
so it's a difference between renting and owning.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, we could sell the house and then divvy up and whatever and go our separate ways, but that's a much more like
It's a
entailed
much more
thing.
yeah, there's a lot more involved than just, yeah. She's going to take your headphones with you.
Yes, that tail, like, a little crooked tail.
She's
So,
happy you're down there, so she's got somebody to pet. And oh,
yes.
you're here.
So what do you think about this, David? You've had quite a few roommates in the sense of renting.
Hmm. I haven't really. Kind of the things you described, they didn't really do though. Kind of just went to college or work and then came back.
But would those people be any of the people that you roomed with? Would you have considered buying a place with them?
No. Nope.
So see, there is a difference between renting and buying together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think
Yep.
that's why the same thing with friendship, like you can, if it's a very bad friendship, you can choose to leave the friendship. Or if it's just somebody that you differ with, like you can choose to, appreciate that they care, their advice, but sort of like,
Limit your time.
yeah, like, or just not take it into consideration because you can
Mhm.
choose those things. But when it comes to marriage, that's where it's a little bit different because the expectation is that it should be
For life.
forever. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you go in, like, again, there's a difference between renting and buying. And I'm not saying there's a difference in living together and getting married because that's not an option.
No, no.
As
Well,
as a rela- as a
as a difference to being married. Well, if we
yeah.
just live together, then it's not the same because there's no commitment, and
And
then
and
one of
and
us we
that's
can leave it.
sort of what actually happens when people live together, though, and then they
Yeah.
get married, and then everything falls apart because they sort of kept that freedom option of being like, "Hey, if it doesn't work out, I always have an out." And all of a sudden, wait a second, this is a lot more serious. Even if they don't have an issue with divorce, it's much more difficult to go through that
Yeah.
process to than just like I'm moving out and we were living together. Uh, and so I'm not, again, definitely not saying as a romantic relationship you should be living together or to see if
Yeah.
seeing if it works. But because it's such a like it's meant to be such a long-term thing, the idea of being unequally yoked is so like it's so much more can be more devastating if you're unequally yoked. It was interesting. I was listening to a podcast of it was oh, Lee Strobel and his wife on this very topic. And they said the interesting thing is they've actually experienced both with each other because before they became Christians, they were equally yoked. Then she became a Christian, and for 2 years they were unequally yoked. And then he became a Christian, and then they were equally yoked again. And so he actually felt that like divisive,
Tension.
horrific part of those 2 years where all of a sudden all both their worlds were just like they were no longer aligned.
Yeah.
And so they've actually experienced it which is very interesting because it's not just like they were believers and became equally like they were non-believers equally yoked. One unequally yoked in the middle, and then so they have seen the benefits of and the downside of being unequally yoked.
Yeah. He's a really good. He describes things so well. He explains things so well that you totally get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be an interesting podcast to listen. I didn't know he had a podcast.
He was on um Les and Leslie Smalley, is that their names?
Ah,
Their podcast. I think it was
okay.
it was like the ones that do like the marriage. It was a marriage podcast. So they actually
Yes, that they're very famous for their psychological podcast.
Yeah.
I've read some of their books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was just so if people are looking for it, you can just look unequally yoked and it came up a few times because it was like different places. But yeah, it was interesting because a lot of times we talk about marriage, but that's because I think it affects mostly like the most devastating effect can be if it's in marriage. But even the
Right.
the other thing is business partners.
That too. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Because if you're business partners and one of you is a Christian, say you're a Christian with a non-Christian wanting to get into the same kind of business, you're going to have that ethical divide because you might, unless you're an unethical Christian, if although I shouldn't generalize like that.
But
Because
even like a non-Christian may have like high ethical standards. But
yes,
the root of those are going to come from a different place, so they could end up being lived out differently.
right. But I've heard of that where one person, well, it's okay. It's only a white lie, which can, and these are the things that can erode into the Christian faith when you've got one person who says, it's not that big of a deal. I do it all the time. I'm fine. Why can't you do it? And you're just like, but that goes against my beliefs. That goes against my values. That goes against my morals.
Yeah, and it's just everything. Like, it can be somebody whose ethical standards are way wonky and all out of whack. Like,
Yeah.
and then where basically something, say your product. I remember hearing this in a business thing one time, and this car company, I think it was, but I can't be sure. It was a company, and they knew their product had an issue that could cause X amount of deaths in a year. But they actually basically in-house said that the lawsuits payouts would be less than recalling all of the product.
Wow.
That happens in like every industry.
Yeah.
The biggest one you'll find that happen is the food marketing industry. Where you ship maybe rotten food out, and then they have to recall that, and then the lawsuits are cheaper than recalling the food, for example. But I guess that can happen everywhere.
Yeah, and I just remember hearing about that specific because I was in one of my business classes, and I don't know, this was like a billion years ago when I did university the first time, so it's very fuzzy, and business was not my strong suit. But I remember hearing that, and it was like, and I'm sure it does, like, but imagine being in that boardroom, coming up, and you're like one of the owners, like that with another person, and they're just like, all of a sudden this guy's like, yeah, this is okay. And like, this is where things happen where owners get like, or they were CEOs and they've been voted out, or there's a division in the company where like one completely, like, and it's huge deal. It's a huge ordeal when it happens. Like, it's because all of a sudden these people who were, friends or business partners, they just like completely hit like basically they have to completely leave each other because of the thing. And this can happen with believers. Like, it's not, again, none of these, like, relationships are tricky and sticky because people are individuals. And even between Christians, you can have the division. So I'm not saying that you will never, like, if you're both Christians, you'll never have an issue, and because again, everybody comes from a different sort of
right
individual growth and what they've been in their history and their belief system. And it's hard enough within the Christian sphere to build these friendships or marriages or business relationships or all these things. Like, so let's not like, let's try not to. I even imagine, like, forget about having like the one of your you have an ox that's bigger than the other, or an ox and a donkey. I'm like, imagine you had an ox and a duck. Like, you're just nothing is going to be good out of this. Like, it's just
wrong.
But also the fact that even if two Christians work together, or two people non-Christians, two people with similar belief sets, so they're equally yoked, is still a difficult thing, regardless of what it is. So we don't want to like just start. Then I think when we talk about things like when we say we're Christian, just by saying the name Christian, it doesn't automatically mean you're going to be equally yoked.
No.
Like, if I tell a guy that I'm a Christian,
what are we talking about? Are we talking about labels? Because that can apply to anything. I could say I'm so-and-so, I behave this way. I am a lover of cake, but then don't like cake.
But I mean,
in
like,
actuality, when I sit down and actually have cake with someone, like, are we talking about the labels people do? Is that
I think it's
the unequally
more like
yoked aspect of it, or is it the actual actions that we do?
I think it's when we like, sometimes we think that just saying that we're Christian, and then people assume that you're going to be equally yoked at that point.
Yeah.
So I tell a guy I'm a Christian, he tells me he's a Christian, and so then we're like, well, whatever, we're going to be equally yoked, so let's figure this out. Instead of actually seeing, it's like, are they a Christian, for one, and then two, like,
so
what are your beliefs?
What's the assumption here? That when you initially like you and I meet for the first time and say we're both Christians. Oh, we should buy a house together. Is that like the because that's what the assumption is appearing to me.
And
No,
that,
Right?
because I
Is it
think when
there
it
like
comes to I think when it
when
comes
it
to
comes to
like things
dating,
like dating, that people just assume as long as we're both Christians, then that means equally yoked.
and
And it
that's what happened
doesn't.
with me. That
Mm.
is really what happened with me. I was going to a church. He was living with the pastor in the basement and would come to church. And he had said that he had done all this wonderful stuff being a Christian. You know, he had gone, been baptized and, he had all this, speaking in tongues and all this kind of stuff. Without me actually, I just kind of went, oh, great, he's Christian. He goes to church. I am going to marry him and we're going to live happily ever after. Ask me
That's
how that worked
literally
for
what I
me.
just said to Natasha. The assumption
Because
is
that's
that
how,
we met for the first time. We said we're both Christians. Let's go buy a house together. That's what you're.
Yeah.
Is that
pretty
what
much,
And
but that's pretty much how
that
sometimes
kind of
it
happened with
happens.
my ex as well, because the thing is too, sometimes they bring you into whirlwind of the emotions, like 3 months and we were engaged. And so
Same.
it was like you just
To,
you're
I'd be,
kind of like saying I can't be unequally yoked, and then you're like, oh, they're Christian. Okay, it's okay. It doesn't matter about anything else. We can work it all out.
yeah, I was married 3 months.
Oh, okay. I would have been, except for my parents. So if it
Hi,
had been up
boss.
to me, yeah.
Yeah. But but that's how when you become so desperate to be married that you don't see that just because somebody says they're Christian means that they are mature, that they are
On the same
um
wavelength. Like even if they are like
yeah,
legitimate, godly, holy, like looking to be like not holy, like holier than thou, but like just like that are pursuing a godly life. It doesn't mean that you're equally yoked in your belief system.
yeah,
Like if
yeah.
I'm going to be from a reformed,
wait. Sorry.
yeah,
You either believe in Christ and that He saves you, or you don't. You're making it sound like there's like a puzzle you have to put together.
There
It's
is.
one or the
it kind
other.
of
Like
is.
I don't.
No, but the thing is, like if me as a reformed Christian
Don't go
meets up,
marrying a Baptist.
yeah, like that has like exactly like infant baptism,
Yeah.
a lot of the reformed doctrines is what I believe fully. Then I meet someone who comes from more of like a Pentecostal background. I'm not saying that they're not believers. I'm not saying that they're not fervent in their faith, but their like application of scripture is different. Their views of like baptism is different, like to the point where like that would make it very difficult to lead like a equally yoked life because
Especially if you have children.
Can you
yeah.
give me an example of a differing application of something that Christ did? Because from my perspective, it's the only time you would have a differing application is if it's something outside or not directly linked to Christ. Where
Oh,
some
what
guy
about the
in the 16,
baptism
17,
thing?
18, pardon me?
What about the baptism? Like, what if one person believes in a believer's baptism only and the other person believes in infant baptism? It can lead to like a whole lot of division. Just something as small as that.
Let's use. I mean, to me, if you look at
And then which church do you go
those
to?
who got baptized in the time of Christ, and those was their infant baptism?
They said
Yeah.
they were baptized so and so, and their whole family were baptized.
Which means children.
Okay, so then what's the problem?
That people are
I
saying
mean,
that it doesn't mean children. That
Yeah.
it means that they became believers,
is
their
there
family
okay?
became believers. So there's like
Is
different.
there an
There's different.
example in the Bible where it says this infant was taken and then baptized?
This is the thing.
Because
There's
a family can mean 5, 13, and 14, 15, 16-year-olds and two parents.
yeah, and it can mean a baby.
And it could just
Okay.
mean one person.
So
That-
let me ask,
right?
let
Two-
me
two
ask
people.
you,
So
David.
this is just the thing. This is the thing. There is logical argumentation on both sides. Okay, there's logical argumentation for infant baptism. There's
Okay.
logical argumentation for believer-only baptism, and it comes down to how you feel convicted of how the scripture is doing.
Okay, so let's just take a step back. How
is gonna be one
does
of those.
either baptizing in infancy or being baptized as an adult affect your salvation?
It doesn't, but it can
So then I
affect
don't
your
understand
marriage.
why this is such a big I don't
Because they're
understand why this is a conflicting topic.
because they're
Well, a baby's born, and the
fully-
wife wants to baptize them as a baby, and the husband wants to wait for a believer's baptism.
But it
This
doesn't
is just an
affect the
example.
baby's salvation at all.
Oh, it
But
affects
they're-
your relationship.
but David, I've been through, like, when I became a Christian, I went through all the churches. I went through Pentecostal churches and all those kind of stuff. And they're the people who believe it must be bad. There are people who only believe that you cannot be baptized until you're old enough to understand why you're being baptized. And they will actually, like, if you were baptized, and Natasha had this with Northview,
Monique,
If you're
that's
baptized as a
that's
baby,
perfectly fine. I
they want you to be
understand that part.
rebaptized.
But how does that affect your salvation?
It doesn't. That's not the point. Like, this is
That's
not
not the
about
point. This is not about
salvation.
salvation.
This is about being unequally yoked in the sense of not being on the same wavelength and the same kind of like spiritual
unbelief-
path.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, sorry again. You're
Yeah.
gonna have to explain to me your point then in bringing this up.
Being unequally yoked.
It can be
You can't
even believers can be unequally
Yeah,
yoked.
but this is
what the point
subjective. If
What
we're
do you mean?
talking biblically and of Christ, we're looking for an objective solution or evidence of an approximation to help someone figure this stuff out and how to get closer to Christ. Correct? Like, I mean, I hope that's what the podcast's about.
Yeah,
About becoming closer to.
yeah.
But
But
I'm having a hard time following what your points are when what we're discussing is very subjective in regards to the actual important aspect of knowing Christ within the context of dating and marriage.
And this is what I'm saying. Like, you can have a truly committed believer, two truly committed believers that would be unequally yoked if they were if they got married, because of their doctrinal belief systems. And it doesn't have anything to do with their salvation. They're both equally saved in front of God. But how they live out their faith is going to look very different. And if what's going to happen is somebody's going to have to compromise in the sense of going against their conviction.
Yeah.
So that is where the issue is.
So I get that. I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can. So effectively, we have to make the assumption if there is some kind of disconnect. So they're ultimately go from you have two belief systems and they differ in some regard that makes them unequally yoked. Okay? There has to be the assumption that one of them is true and one of them is false. No?
I won't say that because I'm not, because there's not, the Bible doesn't exactly say specifically for every single thing. Like I said with the baptism, I said there's equal argumentation, I think, on both sides. It comes down to the spirit and the convicting of what you believe to be convicted and living. That's what it says. Like, what you don't do by faith, you do in sin. So if you, like, for me, for example, what Monique had kind of brought up earlier was I was going to a church, Mennonite Brethren, and I was thinking about becoming a member. But for me to become a member, I would have had to been rebaptized as an adult. And I don't have a problem with people like with their view of believers' baptism, but I had been baptized as an infant, and I felt that by getting rebaptized as an adult was simply checking a box and wouldn't actually be true to what baptism is. And so I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. I didn't feel, I felt like that was just not right because I wasn't doing baptism for the right reason of what baptism was meant to be. It was to check a box. And I didn't agree with that. So I couldn't go forward with it. So it had to do with the fact that I didn't feel like I felt a conviction about not doing it. Now, another person can do it and not feel that conviction because they have a different perspective based on like what they believe the scripture is saying and I'm okay with the other person choosing that.
Yeah.
Because the Bible doesn't specifically say. Now, if the person who says they're Christian and then they go and sleep with another person's spouse, that's not okay. Like the Bible's very specific about that.
Yeah.
It's like, don't do that. That's what it says. So it's not like it's so there's a difference between what the Bible specifically draw commands,
The lines in the sand.
and there's other places that God decided not to be so specific. And I think that people can live out their faith equally, but it looks different. But what happens if they're unequally yoked in that way, in the sense of they're coming from two drastically different ways of thinking and living out their faith? It's going to create a division within the home.
Yeah.
Okay. So
yeah. Just think about these
that.
points. People
I
who
get
believe.
that. So you have two people who are unequally yoked. I get that. Okay. Their
Yeah.
belief systems are different. Now I'm struggling to comprehend. So the point of this podcast then is to show what? That this is a thing?
That it's a
Yes.
possibility.
It's
Yeah.
a possibility. Okay.
Yeah.
That this could cause a lot of unnecessary heartache and is best because I think a lot of times people don't understand why that is such a thing. Like, how can this be such a big thing? Well, think about the kind of arguments you've had with your brother over certain things, like that God created evil. Or how about the arguments that that we've had with each other over predestination and choice? These are the kind of things that can really cause a lot of, it can get down to downright arguments. You've got somebody who is a young earth creationist and somebody who says, no,
Theistic
it will happen evolution and
but
millions
Monique,
of billions of years.
Monique, the examples you provided are not what's the word?
We're talking about relationships.
Yeah. They wouldn't destroy our relationship.
But they
wouldn't.
can.
They could with a married couple.
They
Okay.
can with a marriage, especially if
Like-
it's something.
That's the difference. Like, we're
So-
friends
okay.
and we can differ on what we believe and still remain friends because we aren't needing to force the other person to or try to compromise ourselves into a different way of living because we're married.
Yeah,
But
so-
if you are married, that's a different dynamic and you don't have that kind of opt out that you can as a friend. If that makes sense.
Okay,
Like,
so the whole point of this is to simply make people aware that this exists.
yes. Because I think people focus too much on the fact that unequally yoked in a marriage relationship or dating to marriage means the other person's a non-believer. And a believer and a non-believer. And I think that's a definitely yes, that's what it's talking about. But I think it's also talking about this other thing. Like, instead of an ox and a duck, which is like a believer
Yeah.
and a non-believer,
Yeah.
we now have an ox and another ox of slightly different sizes. So we're generally pulling.
So
in the same direction.
I'm struggling to come to the conclusion, or I'm struggling to comprehend that. Again, it goes back to the assumption that these two things matter, I guess.
And I saw it matter within my own marriage because I don't know if he was, I don't really know, honestly, if he was a believer, but
there's a difference between people believing that something matters and that it actually matters.
But what I mean is, like, in my own marriage, like, and my ex wanted to go to church and things like that, but the churches he wanted to go to were so far out of my comfort zone to worship that I could not worship there. It was just too far, too much. And so I was never comfortable where he went, and he was never comfortable where I wanted to go. So it created a lot of division because one of us was not comfortable. And then usually as a woman, you should be like the husband should be the leader and going to that direction. So it was more often than not, it was to where he was more comfortable. But then what happens is, like, the one person, usually the woman, but not always, will then start to compromise what their belief system is. And again, it's not like you can't go and visit a church and not agree with everything they had to say, but I'm talking about, like, this is now your life. And now you're doing things where you don't believe are like what God intended. And but you'd be happy to be friends with people from that church, but you're not happy to go to that church as your church family. And so what happens is, like, when you're in a 2-person relationship like that, like, really looking at your belief systems is very important thing to look at. And don't just assume if they're a believer, we would definitely be equally yoked, because there's such a wide variety.
So I get what you're saying, and I get the point is to demonstrate that these things exist between two people. Now, how does this kind of connect into Christ, I guess? Because I'm sitting here and I'm listening and I'm trying to kind of connect it, but it's hard because you can have two people who are unequally yoked, who are both effectively saved. That is what I'm getting from you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So both of them are saved. They're unequally yoked. That seems like an issue between the two people.
Well,
that they didn't do their due diligence, I guess, in the sense of when they initially started their relationship.
and that's pretty much what we're
That's
what
kind of
we're
what the
trying to
point
do.
is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
Okay.
I don't want with people just assume it only ever means a believer and a non-believer.
Yeah.
And yes, I think that largely is what they're talking about. But we need to actually nuance it more and saying it's not just that, because when there's a division within a husband and wife, like, that's not a good thing.
No.
And so to find that, like, equally yoked, as I said, it's like, instead of it being an ox and a duck, we have an ox and an ox, but we want those two oxen to be the same.
Yeah.
So another thing too, and I mean, this could be next week's podcast for all I know. 'Cause-
At this point, we're almost at the hour, so probably.
yeah. So,
Right.
so now that
we're going to get into this conversation. Wow.
Now that we've established kind of like the point, like, okay, this is aware, how would say a non, or how would say, okay, say let's make the assumption that they're now married, that they can't get out of that other than what is biblically accurate, say sexual morality for divorce.
Right.
How would now two unequally yoked how would two unequally yoked people try to not fix is not the right word,
Strengthen.
There you go. Strengthen not only their relationship, but the relationship with Christ. Or use Christ to strengthen the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah.
This would be, it could, depending on how unequal it is, it could take a long time. But if people at least become aware of that fact and they want to
work through
and become more equally yoked or more equal,
this kind of thing needs prayer.
Yeah. Prayer and counseling.
Yeah.
Prayer and counseling, definitely.
Yeah.
But
And
you
I
want
mean,
you want to know?
maybe there's other solutions, but
Yes.
from logically, from my perspective, one of the two has to change.
Yeah.
Because you can't walk through life trying to fix something, but not willing to change the core issue. I mean,
And
Yeah.
I saw this happen in a marriage. It was I met I known the guy through university vaguely. He was at the church I went to, and then when I got married and I went back to that area, I saw him again, and he had a wife, and his wife was from a very very different background. He's like pretty conservative, reformed, hymns in a organ, and she's like home church, Southern Baptist, anything goes type of thing. But she realized coming in that she would have to be the one to make the changes because a wife following the husband.
Yeah.
And it wasn't an instantaneous change. It wasn't like she could just change all of her belief systems, but she
no,
had
this
to she had to deal with each one as it came along, with the understanding that she did choose uh, her husband who he was, and what she maybe didn't understand the completeness of what his beliefs is. I mean, it takes a long time to understand what anybody's faith is, right? Like, you can't always get it all done in dating time. But she did come in with the attitude that she needed to work through each of these things as they came along. Everything from what a Sabbath day looked like to what worship looked like to baptism. Again, Baptist to Reformed infant baptism. Like, she had to come, but she came in with the understanding that it would be her that would need to sort of, I don't wanna say compromise, because I don't think compromising your faith is a good thing, but basically coming to the understanding that even if she didn't 100% agree, with, say, her child being baptized, she could respect that her husband believed it to be true, and and come to live with that.
Yeah. I think because the Bible's, I'm going to bring up this horrible word that everybody hates. Submit yourselves to one another. Husbands, wives, submit yourselves to your husband. If your husband is a kind and godly man who loves you, and it's probably easier for the wife to submit herself to the husband's leading. But again, it's one of those teachable moments where you're going to have to sit down and go through the Bible like a fine-tooth comb and kind of figure out just what it is that you believe about certain things, and if they are deal breakers before you get married.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to bring up the topic of, like, the fact that you could be somewhat unequally yoked as believers, so
Yeah.
that you can actually see this ahead of time. Or maybe, like David said, like, you're already married, but maybe this can help a person realize what the tension really is that's going on. And I think that if you're two oxen yoked, you can create an equal yokage through, maybe one's stronger than the other, so we work on the strength of the one. You can create a more equal. If you're in two different species, like a duck and an ox, they're never going to be equally yoked, no matter what you do, unless you
No.
like genetically mutate the duck
but
into a ginormous duck.
there's also the idea. There's also the assumption too, I think, that a lot of people make, is that you're plowing when you're plowing the farmer's field and you're dragging it, and then there's the duck, like Monique said, and then there's the ox. Maybe just separate the two. You don't have to. That's not the right word.
No,
I
because
don't
then
mean like divorce, but I mean like let the ox do what the ox is there to do, and let the duck do what the duck's there to do. Don't have them try to do the same thing, or it's
it's that's a hard one too. That's sort of one of the things that I went through. I ended up going to church by myself throughout my marriage. And it was a very sad thing because, yeah, I'm married, but my husband doesn't want to have anything to do with church. And, the minute he married me and left the house where he was living,
I think that's a great example of what I was trying to say.
That whole church thing just fell away. So, and then he wouldn't step through the church doors, and he never wanted to have the pastor come to visit him to talk to him until he was at death's door. Then he wanted to talk to the pastor.
Yeah, no,
Then he
typically
gave profession of faith.
that's what typically changes a lot of people's minds is
Yeah.
that story.
Yeah. So 1 month before he died.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the, why waste so much? Like, my marriage was miserable. He was a miserable person to live with. And the conviction he had, because I believe he was a believer, but because he would rather wallow in his sin than give it up, we had a miserable marriage. And I did not investigate that strongly enough because I was too caught up in the whirlwind of the romance.
And same with me. Like, I didn't put enough weight on the differences between believers. Even if my ex hadn't been the type of person that he was, like, I know that before I was married, like, I didn't put enough of a weight in the sense that there could be such a difference, because you're just like, I just want to be married at this point. Like, I can deal with anybody at this point. But then if you really think about it, like, what kind of life is that if you all of a sudden all the stuff that you feel convicted of is just like you constantly have to do the other thing. And like, but I didn't, and again, it doesn't mean that you can't marry someone who is different, because everybody's different. But I think you can maybe like take a step back and look at it and with that understanding before you like when you're making these decisions about who you want to date and things like that, and don't just assume Christian plus Christian equals equally yoked.
Yeah.
But it could do, but don't
Yep.
assume it would. That's I
Yeah.
guess it's don't make the assumption.
Yeah. I had gone through so many churches in my walk with Christ when I became a Christian, trying to find the home church. And then one day I had prayed, Lord, bring me to the church that will be my home church. And that's the church that I go to now. Been there since 1996. It's a long time to be with a church for me, because usually it was like a month or two, or maybe a year, maybe two at the most. So if I were to find somebody who went to a different church and he loved his church and he was never going to leave his church, I don't think I could be with him, because I don't want to leave my church. That would be a really bad. No, you've got to come to my church. No, you've got to come to my church. My church is better. No, my church is better. We are the church. No, we are the church. You can have those kind of and then you end up going to separate churches, and how is that?
Or you go to one
unity?
church and you resent not
Yeah.
going to the other person resents. And so yeah, it's not like all this podcast will give you all the answers, but if it
Nope.
makes people aware of, at least to think about it.
Yeah.
Not just in marriage, not just in dating, but when you're getting into business, when you're getting into friendships, like deep friendships, like all these
Look at
things,
how long
like,
it took me to drag you into my church.
right?
I know, right? And now you're a member and all that good kind of stuff, but it's that matter of, because our beliefs are ridiculously close, considering that you grew up in the church and I didn't.
We come from such different backgrounds. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And this is how God can work through that. That's how God says, now I am bringing you to the person that will be your friend for life, because you will have that shared values, and that will make a difference. And I've got a plan for you guys. Who knew?
Right? We're just going to ship all three of you off to Korea for a couple of weeks, and that will be it. You guys
Yeah.
are bonded now.
Yeah. Yeah. You've got no choice. Now we're podcasters. We argue. It's fun.
That's the thing. We can be here, we can argue, and we can come out, and we're still best friends and
Yeah.
family.
Yeah. Friends for life. Fist bump.
Just fist bump.
David's got his
David's
fist
little-
up. You just can't see it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I did.
So anyway, well, I think that we're getting over the hour mark now, so I think we should bring it to a close now. But I think it was a good, lively conversation that people
Yep.
hopefully kept up with.
What?
What? Psh, psh. Little bit of verbal sparring, which is good.
Yeah. It is.
And there's lots of
on our toes.
yeah, exactly right. This is why we have 3 of us instead of just the two of us.
Yeah.
It works
Because if it was just Natasha and myself, we'd agree on everything.
Yeah, we'd just be like, yep, and then that's the end of the podcast.
We need David to keep us in line.
Yes, keep us on our toes. So
There you go.
So
There
yeah,
you
I
go.
think we will keep going with a little bit more dating. I have to figure out which topic to talk about next week, but I think there's maybe a few more dating podcasts within our realm. I have had a few ideas, but I'll figure out what I want to talk about or what we can talk about the next few weeks. But it's good to just think about all these things we can, again, not just in dating, but in other areas of our life. A lot of these things that we're doing when it comes to dating can be applicable to many areas of life and relationships in general. So it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm not dating or I'm done with that. It has applications everywhere because it's about applying God's word to the world around us and what he has said. So that's really our goal, is to bring those things to light and hopefully apply it in ways that people can connect with. So,
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
so anyway, hope you will all join us here next week when we continue our dating series. We'll see you all.
We're out of here.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for spending this time with us today. As we've seen, being unequally yoked isn't just about whether someone calls themselves a Christian or not. It's about whether you're truly aligned in your faith, your values, and how you live those out. If you're in a relationship, a friendship, or any partnership where you feel the tension of being pulled in different directions, we encourage you to pray, seek godly counsel, and be honest about what you're yoked to. Remember, this isn't about judging or labeling others. It's about pursuing the unity and purpose that God desires for us. We'll be back next week with more thoughts and stories about dating and relationships from a faith perspective. Until then, take care, stay grounded in the Word, and remember to live your single life to its fullest.